The snow fell hard that December morning in 1892, covering the small town of Pine Valley like a white blanket. Mary looked out her tiny window and felt her heart sink. Another cold day meant another day without work, and another day without food. For her children, she pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and walked to the bedroom, where her 5 little ones still slept. The oldest, Lucy, was only 12 years old. Then came the twins, Billy and Bobby, who were 10. Next was little Annie, just 7, and the baby of the family, Rose, who had just turned 5. They all shared one small bed, huddled together for warmth because Mary couldn't afford enough wood to keep the fire burning all night. Mary's husband, Tom, had died 3 months ago in a terrible accident at the coal mine. One day he went to work like always, kissing her goodbye and promising to bring home his pay. But that evening, instead of Tom walking through the door, the mine boss came with his hat in his hands and bad news on his lips. The mine boss told Mary it was Tom's own fault that the roof fell in. He said Tom wasn't being careful enough. Because of that, the mining company wouldn't give Mary any money to help her and the children. They just walked away, leaving a widow with 5 hungry mouths to feed and no way to earn money. Mary had tried everything she could think of. She went to every house in town, asking if anyone needed help with cooking, cleaning, or washing clothes. But times were hard for everyone, and most families were barely getting by themselves. The few people who had extra money thought it wasn't proper for a woman to work outside her home, especially a woman with small children. She had sold everything valuable they owned. Tom's pocket watch, her mother's ring, even the good dishes from their wedding. The money from selling those things had lasted about a month. After that, Mary and her children had been living on whatever scraps they could find, and the kindness of neighbors who didn't have much to spare. The church tried to help, but so many families needed assistance that there wasn't enough food to go around. Pastor Williams did his best, but he told Mary honestly that the church pantry was nearly empty. Too many men had died in mining accidents, leaving too many widows and children behind. Mary walked quietly to the kitchen and opened the cupboard. Empty. She checked the small wooden box where she kept their last few pennies. Also empty. She had spent the final coin yesterday on a small piece of bread that she divided between the children, pretending she wasn't hungry so they could have bigger pieces. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but that wasn't what worried her. Most, it was the sound of little Rose coughing in the night, a dry cough that seemed to be getting worse. Annie had been complaining that her tummy hurt, and the twins were so weak they could barely play anymore. Lucy, her oldest, had stopped asking when Papa was coming home and started asking when they would eat again. Mary knew she had to do something today. She couldn't watch her children waste away while she did nothing. She put on her only dress that wasn't torn and worn through, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and stepped out into the cold morning air. The main street of Pine Valley was quiet, except for the sound of snow crunching under her feet. Most of the shops were already open, their warm yellow light spilling out onto the white street. Mary could smell bread baking at the bakery, and her mouth watered so much it almost hurt. She stopped in front of Peterson's bakery and looked through the window. Mr. Peterson was arranging fresh loaves on the shelves behind the counter. The bread looked golden and perfect, and Mary could almost taste how soft and warm it would be. There were also wheels of cheese, jars of jam, and even some sweet cakes that made her remember happier times when she and Tom could afford such treats. For the children, Mary counted the loaves through the window. 2 loaves would feed her children for 3 days, maybe 4 if she was careful. A small wheel of cheese would give them something to go with the bread. Something with enough richness to help them feel full and strong again. She touched the empty pocket of her dress where money used to be. If only she had something to trade, something to offer Mr. Peterson in exchange for the food her children needed. But she had already sold everything worth selling. Mary stood there in the snow for a long time, watching Mr. Peterson work. She had known the Peterson family for years. They were good people who worked hard for their money. She knew it wasn't right to even think about taking something that didn't belong to her. Tom had always taught their children that stealing was wrong, no matter what the reason. But as she stood there, Mary thought about little Rose's cough getting worse every day. She thought about how Lucy tried to hide her hunger by pretending to be too grown up to need much food. She remembered how the twins had stopped running and playing because they were too weak. She pictured Annie, so young and innocent, asking why Mama never ate dinner with them anymore. The wind picked up and snow began falling harder. Mary knew she had to make a choice. She could go home empty-handed and watch her children grow weaker, or she could find a way to get them the food they desperately needed. She noticed that Mr. Peterson was alone in the shop. His wife usually helped him, but today she must have been in the back room or upstairs in their home above the bakery. There were no other customers on such a cold morning. Most people were staying inside where it was warm. Mary's hands shook, and not just from the cold. She had never stolen anything in her entire life. Even as a child, when other kids might take an apple from someone's tree, Mary had always asked permission first. The idea of taking something that didn't belong to her made her feel sick to her stomach. But then she heard it in her mind, little Rose coughing, Annie crying from hunger pains, Lucy trying to comfort the younger ones while her own stomach growled. Mary closed her eyes and made a promise to herself. If she took the bread and cheese, she would find a way to pay Mr. Peterson back as soon as possible. She would work extra hard, take any job she could find, and return every penny the food was worth. Mary took a deep breath and pushed open the bakery door. The warmth hit her face immediately. Along with the wonderful smell of fresh bread and cinnamon, Mr. Peterson looked up from his work and smiled at her. "Good morning, Mary," he said kindly. "Terrible weather we're having, isn't it?" Mary managed to smile back, even though her heart was beating so fast she thought he might hear it. "Good morning, Mr. Peterson," she replied, her voice sounding strange and far away to her own ears. She pretended to look around the shop, examining the different types of bread and pastries. Mr. Peterson went back to his work, humming quietly to himself as he arranged his goods. Mary watched him carefully, waiting for the right moment. Then she heard someone calling from the back of the shop. "Harold!" Mrs. Peterson's voice came from upstairs. "Can you help me move this heavy box?" Mr. Peterson wiped his hands on his apron and called back, "Coming, dear." He looked at Mary and said, "I'll be right back. Please look around all you like." Mary nodded and watched as Mr. Peterson disappeared through the door that led to the stairs. This was her chance, maybe the only chance she would get. Her children's faces flashed before her eyes, and her mother's heart took over where her frightened mind left off. With trembling hands, Mary reached for 2 loaves of bread and a small wheel of cheese, quickly hiding them under her shawl. Mary's heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone in town could hear it. The bread and cheese felt heavy under her shawl as she hurried toward the bakery door. Just a few more steps and she would be outside, safe, with food for her children. But as her hand touched the door handle, she heard Mrs. Peterson's voice from behind the counter. "Stop right there." The voice was sharp and angry. "I saw what you did." Mary froze. Her whole body went cold, colder than the winter wind outside. She turned slowly to see Mrs. Peterson standing in the doorway that led to the back of the shop. The older woman's face was red with anger, and her eyes were fixed on the bulge under Mary's shawl. "I was watching from the window upstairs," Mrs. Peterson said, stepping closer. "I saw you take those things when Harold went to help me. Put them back right now?" Mary's legs felt weak. She wanted to run, but where could she go? Pine Valley was a small town where everyone knew everyone. There was no place to hide. She slowly reached under her shawl and pulled out the bread and cheese, placing them on the counter with shaking hands. "Please," Mary whispered, tears starting to fill her eyes. "My children haven't eaten in 2 days. I was going to pay you back, I promise. As soon as I find work, I'll bring you the money." Mrs. Peterson's expression didn't soften. "That's what they all say. If we let people take things without paying, we'd lose our business in a week. Harold works too hard for his money to let thieves steal from us." Mr. Peterson came back into the shop just then, carrying a heavy wooden box. He saw his wife standing over Mary, who was now crying openly, and the bread and cheese on the counter between them. "What's happening here?" he asked, setting down the box. "I caught her stealing," Mrs. Peterson said firmly. She took 2 loaves and that cheese wheel when you went upstairs. I'm calling Sheriff Thompson right now. Mr. Peterson looked at Mary with sad eyes. He had known her and Tom for years, had even given them credit sometimes when money was tight. But stealing was stealing, and in a small town like Pine Valley, word would spread quickly if he didn't handle this properly. I'm sorry, Mary, he said quietly. I truly am. But my wife is right. We can't let this go unpunished. Mrs. Peterson was already putting on her coat. I'll be back with the sheriff in a few minutes. Don't let her leave, Harold. Mary sank into a chair near the window, her whole body shaking. She thought about her children at home, probably awake by now, and wondering where their mother had gone. Lucy would be trying to take care of the little ones, pretending everything was fine even though she was just a child herself. Sheriff Thompson arrived faster than Mary had hoped. He was a big man with a thick mustache and kind eyes, but he took his job seriously. Everyone in Pine Valley respected him because he was fair but firm. Mary Fletcher, he said, using her full name in that official way that made everything feel real and terrible. Mrs. Peterson says you took bread and cheese without paying. Is that true? Mary looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. Yes, it's true, but Sheriff, my children are starving. I didn't know what else to do, Sheriff Thompson nodded slowly. He had 5 children of his own and couldn't imagine how desperate a mother would have to be to steal food for them. But the law was the law, especially in a frontier town where justice had to be swift and clear. I understand your situation, Mary, and my heart goes out to you, but I have to arrest you. You know that, don't you? Mary stood up on unsteady legs. What will happen to my children? They're alone at home right now? I'll make sure someone checks on them, the sheriff promised. But right now, I need you to come with me. The walk to the jail felt like the longest walk of Mary's life. People stopped on the street to stare as Sheriff Thompson led her down the main road. Some looked at her with pity, others with judgment. Word was already spreading through the town that Mary Fletcher had been caught stealing from the bakery. The jail was a small stone building next to the courthouse. It had 2 cells, and most of the time they sat empty because Pine Valley was usually a peaceful place. Sheriff Thompson opened one of the cells and waited for Mary to step inside. I'll bring you something to eat later, he said gently. And I'll make sure your children are taken care of until this gets sorted out. Mary sat on the narrow bed in her cell and put her head in her hands. Through the small window, she could see people walking by on the street. Some stopped to peer through the bars at her, whispering to each other about what she had done. The news traveled fast in a small town. By afternoon, it seemed like everyone in Pine Valley knew that Tom Fletcher's widow had been arrested for stealing. Some people felt sorry for her, understanding how desperate she must have been. Others felt that stealing was wrong no matter what the reason, and that Mary needed to face the consequences of her actions. Judge Harrison arrived on the evening train from the county seat. He was known throughout the territory as a man who followed the law exactly as it was written. He didn't make exceptions, didn't let emotions cloud his judgment, and didn't believe in giving people second chances when they broke the law. The judge was a tall, thin man with gray hair and steel blue eyes that seemed to look right through a person. He had been a judge for 20 years and had seen every kind of case imaginable. He believed that mercy was the enemy of justice, and that letting criminals off easy only encouraged more crime. That evening, Judge Harrison met with Sheriff Thompson and the town prosecutor, a young man named Wilson who had only been practicing law for 2 years. They discussed Mary's case in the judge's temporary office above the general store. The facts are clear, Judge Harrison said, reading through the paperwork. She took bread and cheese from Peterson's bakery without paying. Mrs. Peterson witnessed the crime, and the defendant has admitted her guilt. This is a straightforward case of theft. Young Mr. Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Your Honor, perhaps we should consider the circumstances? She's a widow with 5 small children, and they were starving. Judge Harrison looked at him with those cold blue eyes. Mr. Wilson, the law doesn't make exceptions for circumstances. If we start letting people steal because they claim to be hungry, where does it end? Every thief in the territory will come here expecting the same treatment. But surely there's something we can do, Mr. Wilson pressed. Some alternative to the usual punishment. The usual punishment for theft in this territory is hanging, Judge Harrison said matter-of-factly. And that's exactly what Mrs. Fletcher will face tomorrow morning. I've scheduled her trial for 8 o'clock. Sheriff Thompson felt his stomach drop. He had hoped the judge might show some mercy, maybe sentence Mary to some time in jail, or require her to work off what she owed. But hanging? For stealing bread to feed her children? Judge, Sheriff Thompson said carefully, the whole town is talking about this case. A lot of people think Mrs. Fletcher was driven to desperation. They might not take kindly to seeing her hanged. Judge Harrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. Sheriff, I didn't become a judge to win popularity contests. I became a judge to uphold the law. If the people of Pine Valley don't like my decisions, they can take that up with the territorial governor? That night, Mary lay in her cell unable to sleep. Through the thin walls, she could hear people talking on the street about her upcoming trial. Some voices were sympathetic, others harsh. But all of them seemed to agree on one thing. Judge Harrison was going to make an example of her as dawn approached. Mary thought about her children waking up in their cold house, probably wondering why their mother hadn't come home. She wondered who would take care of them after she was gone. The morning sun barely broke through the gray clouds as people began gathering outside the courthouse. Word had spread through Pine Valley like wildfire that Mary Fletcher's trial would decide whether she lived or died. Some folks came because they wanted to see justice done, others came hoping to witness mercy. Most came because in a small town where nothing much happened, a trial like this was the biggest event anyone could remember. Mary sat in her cell, listening to the voices growing louder outside. Sheriff Thompson had brought her a bowl of thin soup and a piece of bread for breakfast, but her stomach was too twisted with fear to eat much. She kept thinking about her children, wondering if they understood what was happening to their mother. It's time, Sheriff Thompson said quietly, unlocking her cell door. His face looked tired, like he hadn't slept much either. The judge wants to start exactly at 8 o'clock. Mary stood up on shaky legs and smoothed down her dress as best she could. She had slept in her clothes and they were wrinkled and dirty. Now, she wished she looked more presentable for what might be the last time anyone saw her alive. The courthouse was packed with people. Every seat was filled, and more folks stood along the walls and crowded near the back. Mary recognized most of the faces, neighbors, shopkeepers, people she had known for years. Some looked at her with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with the hard stare of those who believed she deserved whatever punishment came her way. Near the front, she saw her 5 children sitting with Mrs. Anderson, the pastor's wife. Little Rose was crying quietly, and Lucy was trying to comfort her while fighting back her own tears. The twins sat perfectly still, their young faces confused and frightened. Annie kept looking around the room like she was searching for someone to explain why her mother was in so much trouble. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom wearing his black robes. Looking as stern and unforgiving as everyone said he was, the room fell silent as he took his seat behind the big wooden desk at the front. He opened a thick book and adjusted his glasses before speaking. "This court is now in session," he announced in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. "We are here to try the case of Mary Fletcher, charged with theft of bread and cheese from Peterson's bakery." Young Mr. Wilson stood up at the table where he sat with Mary. He had stayed up most of the night trying to figure out how to save her life, but he knew the facts were against them. Still, he had to try. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cracking slightly with nervousness, "before we begin, I would like to request that the court consider the unusual circumstances of this case." Judge Harrison looked at him over his glasses. "Mr. Wilson, the circumstances are quite usual. A person took property that didn't belong to them. That is called theft, and the law is very clear about how we handle theft." Mr. Wilson pressed on, despite the judge's cold tone. "But, Your Honor, Mrs. Fletcher is a widow with 5 small children." Her husband died in a mining accident 3 months ago, and the mining company refused to pay any compensation. She and her children were starving. Many people face hardship, Mr. Wilson, Judge Harrison replied. That doesn't give them the right to steal from their neighbors. Mrs. Peterson was called to testify first. She stood at the front of the courtroom and told everyone exactly what she had seen. Mary taking the bread and cheese when her husband wasn't looking. Her voice was firm and clear as she described catching Mary in the act. Did Mrs. Fletcher say anything to you when you confronted her? The prosecutor asked. She claimed she was going to pay us back, Mrs. Peterson answered. But that's what they all say when they get caught. Mr. Peterson was called next. He looked uncomfortable as he walked to the front of the room. Unlike his wife, he spoke quietly and kept glancing at Mary with sad eyes. Mr. Peterson, the prosecutor said, can you confirm that Mrs. Fletcher took bread and cheese from your store without paying? Yes, sir, that's what happened, Mr. Peterson replied. But I want to say that Tom Fletcher was a good man, and Mary was always honest in her dealings with us. I believe she was truly desperate, Judge Harrison frowned. Mr. Peterson, you're here to tell us what you saw, not to give your opinion about the defendant's character or motives. When it was time for Mary to speak in her own defense, Mr. Wilson helped her stand up. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to walk to the front of the courtroom. Looking out at all those faces, she saw some people who seemed to be on her side and others who had already decided she was guilty. Your Honor, Mary began, her voice barely above a whisper, I know what I did was wrong. I've never stolen anything in my life before, and I never thought I would. But my children... Her voice broke, and she had to stop for a moment to collect herself. My children hadn't eaten in 2 days. Little Rose has been coughing something terrible, and she's getting weaker every day. The twins can barely stand up, they're so hungry. Annie keeps asking me when we're going to have dinner, and I haven't had an answer for her. Mary looked directly at Judge Harrison, hoping to see some softness in those cold blue eyes. I tried everything else first, Your Honor. I asked everyone in town for work. I sold everything we owned. I went to the church, but they don't have enough food for all the families that need help. I was watching my children waste away, and I didn't know what else to do. She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. This is a letter from my oldest daughter, Lucy. She wrote it last night when she heard what was happening. She wanted me to give it to you. Judge Harrison took the letter and read it silently. Lucy had written in her careful 12-year-old handwriting about how hard her mother worked to take care of them, how she always went without food so the children could eat, and how scared they all were of being left alone in the world. For just a moment, something flickered across Judge Harrison's face, but it was gone so quickly that most people missed it. Mr. Wilson made his final plea to the court. He talked about mercy and compassion, about the difference between someone who steals for greed and someone who steals to keep their children alive. He reminded everyone that Mary had immediately admitted what she had done and had expressed genuine remorse. Your Honor, he concluded, I'm not asking you to ignore the law. I'm asking you to remember that sometimes the law should serve justice, and sometimes justice requires mercy. The prosecutor stood up to make his closing argument. He was brief and to the point. The law exists to protect everyone's property. He said, if we make exceptions for people who claim to have good reasons for stealing, then anyone can justify taking whatever they want. Mrs. Fletcher broke the law, and she must face the consequences. Judge Harrison sat quietly for several long minutes, looking down at the papers on his desk. The courtroom was so silent that people could hear their own heartbeats. Mary closed her eyes and prayed harder than she had ever prayed in her life. Finally, Judge Harrison stood up. Mary Fletcher, he said in that cold, official voice, you have admitted to the crime of theft. The law of this territory is clear. The penalty for theft is death by hanging. Gasps and cries filled the courtroom. Mary felt the world spinning around her as the judge's words sank in. In the front row, her children began crying loudly, with little Rose screaming, "Mama!" over and over again. However, Judge Harrison continued, and the room fell silent again. Execution will be carried out at dawn tomorrow morning. As Sheriff Thompson led Mary back to her cell, she looked over her shoulder at her children one last time. She tried to memorize their faces, knowing it might be the last time she ever saw them. Tomorrow morning, as the sun rose over Pine Valley, Mary Fletcher would face the gallows for the crime of trying to feed her children. That night, Mary sat in her cold jail cell staring at the small window that showed only darkness. Tomorrow morning, when the sun came up, her life would be over. She thought about her children sleeping in their little house, probably crying themselves to sleep, wondering what would happen to them when their mother was gone. Outside her cell, Pine Valley was unusually quiet. Most folks had gone home after the trial, but the whole town felt heavy with sadness. Even people who believed Mary deserved punishment weren't comfortable with the idea of hanging a mother for trying to feed her children. About 10 miles outside town. On the biggest ranch in the area, a man named Daniel sat alone in his large, empty house. He was 52 years old and had lived by himself for the past 15 years, ever since his wife Helen had died giving birth to their son. The baby had died too, leaving Daniel with nothing but memories and a house that felt too big and too quiet. Daniel had been in town that day to buy supplies when he heard about the trial. Something made him stay and watch from the back of the courtroom. He saw Mary standing there, scared and desperate, trying to explain why she had taken food for her children. He saw those 5 little ones in the front row, crying for their mother. As Daniel sat in his empty house that night, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed. He kept remembering the day his own wife and son had died, how helpless he had felt, how alone he had been ever since. He had built his ranch from nothing, working from dawn to dusk for 20 years, but what was the point of all that success if he couldn't use it to help someone who really needed it? Daniel walked through his house, looking at all the empty rooms. There was the nursery that Helen had prepared for their son, still exactly as she had left it. There was the big kitchen where she used to cook meals for the ranch hands, now mostly unused because Daniel just ate simple food by himself. There were bedrooms that had been meant for the large family they had planned to have, all standing empty and collecting dust. The more Daniel thought about it, the more an idea began forming in his mind. It was crazy, maybe impossible, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was supposed to do something. He had money, land, and resources that he barely used. Mary had children who needed a home and a future. Maybe there was a way to help them both. Around midnight, Daniel made a decision. That surprised even him. He saddled his horse and rode through the cold night toward town. The streets of Pine Valley were completely empty, with most windows dark and everyone asleep. But there was still a light on in Judge Harrison's room above the hotel. Daniel tied his horse to the post outside the hotel and climbed the stairs to the second floor. He knocked on the door, knowing he was probably crazy for bothering a judge in the middle of the night, but feeling like he had to try. Judge Harrison opened the door, wearing his nightclothes and looking annoyed. "Mr. Williams, what are you doing here at this hour? Don't you know what time it is?" "Judge Harrison," Daniel said, taking off his hat respectfully, "I know it's late, and I apologize for disturbing you. But I need to talk to you about Mary Fletcher's case." The judge frowned. "The case is closed, Mr. Williams. The sentence has been pronounced. There's nothing more to discuss." "Please, just hear me out," Daniel said. "I have a proposition that might change things." Judge Harrison studied Daniel's face for a moment. He knew Daniel Williams by reputation, a successful rancher, honest in his business dealings and respected throughout the territory. Against his better judgment, the judge stepped aside and let Daniel into his room. "You have 5 minutes," Judge Harrison said, sitting down in a chair by the window. "Make it quick." Daniel took a deep breath and began explaining his idea. "Judge, I want to take responsibility for Mary Fletcher's debt. I'll pay Peterson's Bakery 3 times what the food was worth. More than that, I want to offer Mary and her children work on my ranch." Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Williams, the law doesn't work that way. You can't just pay someone's fine and make their crime disappear." "But what if it wasn't just paying a fine?" Daniel continued. "What if Mary worked for me for 7 years to pay off her debt? Like an indentured servant, the way they used to do back east. She could work on my ranch, and her children could live there too, get proper food and schooling. The judge was quiet for a moment, thinking, even if such an arrangement were legal, why would you want to do this? You don't even know Mrs. Fletcher. Daniel looked out the window toward the jail where Mary was spending what might be her last night alive. Judge, I've been alone for 15 years. My wife and son died, and I've been living in an empty house ever since. I have more land and money than I know what to do with, but no family to share it with. Maybe this is a way for all of us to help each other. Judge Harrison stood up and walked to his bookshelf, pulling out a thick book of territorial laws. He flipped through the pages for several minutes while Daniel waited nervously. There is actually a provision in territorial law, the judge said slowly, that allows for indentured service in place of other punishments. It's rarely used anymore, but it's still legal. Daniel felt his heart racing. Does that mean you could change Mary's sentence? It would be highly unusual, Judge Harrison said, still reading through the law book. The arrangement would have? To be very specific, Mrs. Fletcher would essentially become your employee for a set period of time, working to pay off her debt to society. Her children would be your responsibility as well. I can handle that, Daniel said quickly. I have a big house with plenty of room. The children could go to school, have regular meals, maybe even help around the ranch when they're old enough. Judge Harrison closed the book and looked at Daniel seriously. Mr. Williams, do you understand what you're proposing? You're talking about taking responsibility for a woman and 5 children for 7 years. That's a huge commitment. Daniel nodded. I've thought about it, Judge. I know it won't be easy, but I believe it's the right thing to do. Those children deserve a chance at a good life, and Mary deserves a chance to work off her debt instead of dying for it. The judge was quiet for a long time, thinking about everything Daniel had said. It was true that the law allowed for indentured service, and it was also true that hanging a mother for stealing bread to feed her children didn't sit well with many people in the community. If I were to consider this, Judge Harrison said finally, it would have to be completely legal and binding. Mrs. Fletcher would have to agree to work for you for 7 years. She couldn't leave before that time, and you couldn't send her away. Are you prepared for that kind of arrangement? Yes, sir, I am, Daniel said without hesitation. Judge Harrison walked to his desk and picked up his pen. I'll need to write up new legal documents tonight. The execution is scheduled for dawn, so if we're going to do this, it has to be done before then. For the next 3 hours, Judge Harrison worked by lamplight, writing out the legal papers that would change Mary's death sentence to 7 years of indentured service. Daniel sat in a chair nearby, hardly able to believe what was happening. As the first light of dawn began to show through the window, Judge Harrison finished the last document. It's done, he said, setting down his pen. Now we need to go talk to Mrs. Fletcher and see if she agrees to this arrangement. Daniel and Judge Harrison walked through the quiet streets toward the jail as the sun began to rise over Pine Valley. In a few minutes, they would offer Mary Fletcher a choice between death and a new life she never could have imagined. Mary heard footsteps outside her cell just as the first rays of sunlight crept through her small window. Her heart sank, thinking Sheriff Thompson was coming to take her to the gallows. She had spent the whole night saying goodbye to her children, in her mind trying to find peace with the idea that this was her last morning on earth. But when the cell door opened, she was surprised to see Judge Harrison standing there with a man she recognized but had never spoken to, Daniel Williams, a wealthy rancher who lived outside town. Both men looked tired, like they had been awake all night, but there was something different in their eyes. Not the cold look of death she expected, but something that almost looked like hope. Mrs. Fletcher, Judge Harrison said in a voice that was softer than she had heard from him before, we need to discuss something important with you. Mary stood up slowly, confused by what was happening. Is it time? She asked quietly. Not exactly, the judge replied. Mr. Williams here has made an unusual proposal, and I want you to hear what he has to say. Daniel stepped forward, holding his hat in his hands. Up close, Mary could see that he was a kind-looking man with gentle eyes, though his face showed the lines of someone who had known sadness. Mrs. Fletcher, Daniel began, I was in the courtroom yesterday during your trial. I heard what you said about your children, and I've been thinking about it all night. Mary looked back and forth between the two men, not understanding why they were both here or what this had to do with her execution. Daniel continued, I live alone on a big ranch outside town. My wife and son died 15 years ago, and I've been by myself ever since. I have more space and resources than I know what to do with, but no family to share them with. Mary felt her heart beating faster, but she was afraid to hope for anything. I've made a deal with Judge Harrison, Daniel sighed. Instead of what was supposed to happen this morning, you and your children can come work for me. You'd be my housekeeper and help run the ranch, and your children would live there too. They'd have regular meals, warm beds, and I'd make sure they get proper schooling. Mary stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. I don't understand. Are you saying I don't have to die? No, you don't, Judge Harrison said. But this isn't a free pardon. Mrs. Fletcher, you would be working for Mr. Williams for 7 years to pay off your debt to society. It's called indentured service, and it's completely legal. You'd essentially be his employee, and you couldn't leave during that time. Mary felt her knees go weak with relief. She grabbed onto the bars of her cell to steady herself. 7 years of work. In exchange for my life and a home for my children? That's right, Daniel said. But I want you to understand what you'd be agreeing to. It would be hard work, cooking, cleaning, helping with ranch business. And you'd be far from town, so you wouldn't see your friends very often. Your children would have to adjust to a completely different life. Mary thought about her children, probably awake by now in their cold, empty house, wondering if their mother was still alive. Then she thought about what Daniel was offering, warm meals, safe beds, and a future for all of them. Mr. Williams, she said, tears starting to flow down her cheeks, why would you do this for us? You don't even know us. Daniel was quiet for a moment, looking out the small window at the morning sky. Mrs. Fletcher, I've been alone for a very long time. When I saw you in that courtroom yesterday, trying so hard to save your children, it reminded me of what really matters in life. Maybe we can help each other. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Mrs. Fletcher, I need an answer now. The townspeople are already gathering outside for your execution? If you agree to this arrangement, we need to go out there and announce the change in your sentence. Mary closed her eyes and thought about her children one more time. When she opened them, her decision was clear. Yes, she said firmly. I agree to work for Mr. Williams for 7 years. Thank you both for giving me this chance. Within an hour, the three of them stood on the courthouse steps, facing a crowd of confused townspeople who had come to witness an execution. Many folks looked disappointed that they wouldn't see the spectacle they had expected, but others seemed relieved that Mary's life would be spared. Judge Harrison read the new legal documents aloud, explaining that Mary Fletcher would serve 7 years of indentured service to Daniel Williams instead of facing death. Some people in the crowd grumbled that she was getting off too easy, but most seemed to accept that justice was still being served, just in a different way. After the announcement, Daniel drove Mary to her old house to collect her children and their few belongings. When they saw their mother alive and free, the children cried with joy and relief. Little Rose ran to Mary and wouldn't let go, while Lucy asked a dozen questions about what was going to happen to them. We're going to live on Mr. Williams' ranch, Mary explained to her children as they packed their few possessions. It's going to be very different from what we're used to, but we'll be together and we'll have enough food and warm beds. The drive to Daniel's ranch took most of the day. The children had never been so far from town, and they stared in amazement at the huge open spaces and the mountains in the distance. When they finally arrived at the ranch house, they couldn't believe how big it was. Daniel showed them to the west wing of the house, which had several bedrooms and its own sitting area. The children explored their new rooms with wonder, having never had so much space or such comfortable beds. For the first time in months, Mary felt like her children were truly safe. That first evening, Mary cooked dinner for everyone in Daniel's large kitchen. It felt strange to have so much food available after months of scraping by on almost nothing. The children ate until they were completely full, something they hadn't experienced since their father died. After dinner, Daniel sat with the family in the main room, watching the children play by the fireplace. He had forgotten how much life and laughter children could bring to a house. For the first time since his wife and son had died, his home felt truly alive. Over the following weeks, Mary proved herself to be an excellent housekeeper and cook. She organized Daniel's business papers, managed the household accounts, and turned his neglected home into a warm, welcoming place. The children adapted quickly to their new life, helping with small chores around the ranch and attending the school that Daniel arranged for them. As months passed, something unexpected began to happen. Mary and Daniel started to depend on each other in ways that went beyond their legal arrangement. She brought warmth and organization to his life, while he provided security and stability that she had never known. They found themselves talking long into the evening after the children were asleep, sharing stories about their past and their hopes for the future. The children flourished in their new environment. They grew strong and healthy with regular meals, and their laughter filled the house every day. Lucy became an excellent student and helped Daniel with his reading in the evenings. The twins learned to care for the ranch animals, while little Annie and Rose brought joy to everyone with their innocent questions and observations. 5 years into their 7-year agreement, on a quiet evening in spring, Daniel asked Mary if she would consider staying permanently, not as his employee, but as his wife. She said yes, and they were married in a simple ceremony with her children as witnesses. Mary never forgot the desperate day when she stole bread to feed her children. But she learned that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the greatest blessings. Daniel had saved her from the gallows, but she had saved him from a lifetime of loneliness. Together, they built something neither could have imagined alone, a family born from compassion and strengthened by love.